My name is Cynthia Knowles. It's lovely to be with you all. You come highly recommended from my friend Carol Hood, who nudged me to share some thoughts with you this morning. So thank you for your part in making this world a better place. I worked as a hospice interfaith chaplain for 11 years before retiring recently. And when someone asked what I did for work, and I answered honestly, I got one of two responses. Isn't that depressing? Or, oh, that's such sacred work. You are all angels. A personal hospice story might then ensue. Both responses were fine, but I learned to often say I worked for the visiting nurses so the conversation could move on. But my answer to the first response, isn't that depressing, was no, it's the best job I ever had. It's joyful, fulfilling, and it has taught me how to live. I get to listen to the best stories and receive the best gifts. Those stories have become part of me and changed me, so I want to share with you just 3 of the many lessons I learned from my hospice work. Know that the names and details have been changed for confidentiality. The lessons are, 1, you never know what your actions will mean to someone. 2, healing happens even when recovery or a fairy tale ending does not. 3, presence is more important than words. So 1, you never know what your actions will mean to someone. My patient was a big guy lying in the bed face up, taking in raspy breaths. He was young, too young to be dying, too strong to be leaving his wife and his 7-year-old son. I'll call him Jeff. He was my patient, but it was the whole family I was caring for and the son, Oliver, that the story is really about. While Jeff's wife, Sheila, Oliver, and some of the couple's many siblings were by the bedside, Oliver was darting here and there, demanding attention. Sheila's patience was wearing thin. As we talked, she started to cry. Stop crying, Oliver demanded. You can't cry, as he poked her in the side. Sheila asked one of the sisters to take him out, but he evaded her and no one tried too hard to send him away. I suggested a prayer. Oliver started prodding his mother again. Don't be sad, stop that. It's okay to be sad, okay to cry, several of us said. I offered, we can hold hands, Oliver, for a prayer. See what it feels like. He took the hands of those beside him and quieted down. I offered words of hope, a release from suffering, of support and assurance. There was only a moment's silence as we let go of our hands before Oliver said, you prayed for the wrong thing. You were supposed to pray for him to get better, while looking up at me as if betrayed. He ran to the couch and sat staring forward. I knelt down so we were at eye level. You want him to be like he was? Without looking at me, he said, yes. He stared ahead. I'm sorry, Oliver. I talked a little more to the family, then said goodbye to them and Jeff. When I picked up my phone messages the next morning, there was one from the night nurse saying Jeff had died that night. The family was doing okay, all things considered. It was an emotional and poignant night, actually, she said. Oliver had us all hold hands and pray over his dad. He led us in prayer. It was pretty incredible. I hadn't given Oliver his dad's recovery, but I may have given Oliver something to hold on to in the midst of his loss, even if it was just his family's hands. When I first met the family, I didn't know what that first prayer had given Oliver. We don't have to physically hold hands to make a connection, though it helps. In a circle around a bedside, it often feels to me like our hands complete an electrical circuit. But we are connected in so many ways, and our actions affect others. Maybe we won't know when we have made a difference, but maybe we just have to live life as if it did, and that we do. Lesson 2. Healing happens even when recovery or a fairy tale ending does not. I hadn't been working in hospice long when I visited a new patient, Janet, in her home where she lived alone. Photos of a young man in uniform lined a shelf. When I asked about her photos, she told me about her son who had died when he was barely 20. I asked if she had other family. Yes, she said feebly, but I never talked to any of them. In the next visit, the social worker and I asked more about family. Janet was divorced, and she was estranged from her daughter. We urged her to let us contact her daughter to let her know about her mother's illness. She agreed. I'm sure I was imagining a fairy tale story of reconciliation. Spoiler alert, it didn't happen that way. Did you know that families are complicated? If I didn't before, I do now. We did find Janet's daughter, who I'll call Sarah. Sarah told me how her mother had always worshiped her brother, but always scorned and criticized Sarah. Sarah tried to be worthy, but never was. In time, she gave up and got on with her life, and yet she agreed to help her mother manage this final illness. She handled all the logistics of her mother's care and then the move to the hospice house in her final weeks. As Janet neared death, Sarah was determined to try one last time to touch her mother's heart. We talked about what she wanted to say to Janet and what she wanted to hear from her. I asked, "And what if you never hear those words, Sarah?" "Then I will know that I tried my best, that I was there for her at the end of her life, even if she didn't show me gratitude or love. I won't have regrets. I will know that I tried." Sarah never heard the words she longed for, but she experienced healing, not in the way of a fairy tale ending, but healing just the same. Often healing and reconciliation do happen at bedsides, but healing can happen in many ways. A woman whose husband died at hospice house volunteered to do clerical work weekly that helped her connect her loss to a way of giving back. Another patient at the house found healing by being wheeled out to the parking lot where her horses had arrived for a chance to say goodbye. A man in his 40s whose soulmate, hiking partner, and nature lover died found that a sculpture helped him heal. His wife had always imagined coming back as an otter, so this sculpture of an otter leaping up as if in a joyful dance helped him to feel her presence. Because healing takes many shapes and can take time to find its expression, we often need help to find it. In his book, The 4 Things That Matter Most, Dr. Ayur Bayak, a specialist in end-of-life care, says that before someone dies, they and their loved ones should find a way to say 4 things. Forgive me, I forgive you, thank you, and I love you. Hospice patients who come onto hospice while they are still conscious have the opportunity to say what matters most to their loved ones and to give their loved ones the chance to say what needs to be said. Because none of us really knows when our own life will end or when we will no longer be able to communicate, we should be telling each other all the time those important things. Forgive me, I forgive you, thank you, I love you. Especially now when so much is uncertain, take advantage of those moments for love, for appreciation, for healing. Lastly, presence is more important than words. I became aware that an elderly man, Tom, in our hospice house just sat in a chair by the window doing nothing and not really responding to his son's daily visits. The social worker, Bonnie, took notice first and offered to take him outside in a wheelchair, but he declined listlessly. He had spent his life logging with a team of draft horses, Out in all weather, he was more at home with animals and trees than people. The social worker, Bonnie, and I hatched a plan. The next day, she didn't ask him if he wanted to go out. She told him he was, and he agreed half-heartedly. There's a paved path around Hospice House with a slope to the back. It was fall and a beautiful day. Bonnie did a loop around the house, then another and another. She would point out a flower in the garden or the colors on the maple. He only nodded, but something was changing. I took the next day doing the same, but managed one more loop than Bonnie. It became a competition in which Tom began to take notice, and each day he brightened a bit, looking forward to his time outside and a few more loops than the day before. We kept him out as long as we could in any weather. On one particularly lovely day, after the loops that had gotten numerous, I took him to our garden just to sit. We didn't talk. We just looked at the colorful leaves across the parking lot as they swayed in the breeze. It felt like worship. I couldn't bear to take him inside. So I called another staff member to sit with him when I no longer could. He died that night, and I long thought of him when I stepped out of the front door. His spirit was too big to be kept indoors. My words were of little use to him. It was presence that was meaningful and healing. In a world filled with words, media, and busyness, I think we undervalue the power of quiet presence. Being centered and mindful can bring a holy connection to another person, a gathered group, or to that spirit within and beyond us. The day my first husband died, my neighbor saw the police car at my house and came over. He asked what he could do, and I didn't know. So I said, I am just going to sit here for a while, so you know I am here. And he did, for 2 hours. I learned then how much presence can mean, and that it was something I could do for others. Presence goes beyond words. The Bible story of Job tells of his misery when everything has been taken from him, his family, his wealth, and his health. 3 friends show up and sit with him for 3 days silently. Of course, then they start talking and saying all kinds of unhelpful things, but the 3 days of sitting was a good start. A quiet presence doesn't have to be reserved for big events. Think of small hurts that might be eased with your presence. I know a physical presence is hard right now, but how about a quiet, socially distanced walk? Sitting outside an elder's nursing home window, or telling someone they are on your mind. When has someone just showed up for you and made a difference? Have you felt a sustaining presence when you just sit and pay attention? There's a song I listened to by a Quaker singer-songwriter named Carrie Newcomer. In her song, There Is a Light in the Window, it says, "We pass from mystery to mystery, so I won't lie. I don't know what happens when people die." I don't pretend to either, but from what I have seen, I am convinced there is something. Elizabeth hadn't spoken or eaten for days. I was new to this chaplain thing and was asked to just sit with her for a while. She looked so peaceful and comfortable. I sat quietly with her, holding her in the light, as we Quakers say, and wondering what she was experiencing. Suddenly, she sat straight up, lifted her arms, looked up at the ceiling, and said, "Hello, everybody," with joy, her face shining. Then laid back down and closed her eyes with a smile. She died the next day. I don't know exactly what happens when we die, but it was amazing to see people who showed they saw something beautiful. I heard so many stories and saw so many things that convinced me there is something next. I believe it is important to live my life as if the things that I do and the words I speak may have results that I can't guess. I live with gratitude for the large and small gifts this life has given me. I look for healing, however it shows itself, and try to encourage it in others. And I remember that showing up is more powerful than I expect. There is so much I learned from my patients, their families, their friends, and the other staff members. I feel blessed. These are just some of the lessons, the gifts. You never know what your actions will mean to someone. Healing happens even when recovery or a fairy tale ending does not. Presence is more important than words. Thank you for letting me share these lessons with you.